Hello, everyone, and welcome today to TaxCycle webinar. That's actually on DoxCycle, our source document management product that comes in the TaxCycle suite. Today, we'll give you a nice overview of how it slots into your practice workflow and give you some ideas about how you might use it with your clients. My name is Elizabeth Cole. I'm Director of Communications and User Experience here at TaxCycle, and I've been working with DoxCycle since I first started over a decade ago. So hopefully I'll be able to give you a sense of what you can do with it too. So I always like to start with what you can do with DoxCycle. So I know that many people buy the TaxCycle suite and they have their T1 and their T2 and their T3 and all the things they need for slips. And DoxCycle is included in there, and they may never install DoxCycle. It's a separate program that you install, you download from our website, and it allows you to create an organized PDF archive of all the documents that you have to support preparing a tax return. Whether that tax return is a T1 return or a T2 return, doesn't matter, it can handle both. But it means that that PDF file is something that you can send back to your client or keep it in your digital filing organization, so that if later you need to extract documents and upload them to the CRA for your clients, you have it all there. Your 2022 or 2023 file is all ready to go. So the neat thing about DoxCycle is it integrates well with TaxCycle, so you can link between the two programs and files in the two programs so that you can bring up a source receipt on one screen and your tax return on the other if you like, and they will stay synchronized. So it's a really handy way of dealing with source documents. It is actually our oldest product. It was the product we created before TaxCycle. And so some of the concepts within it go back a fair ways. Specifically, this was created before autofill my return. So back in those days, what we did is we grabbed our paper PDF, well, not paper PDF, our paper slip, and put it in the scanner, and then we needed a way to get that data quickly over to TaxCycle. So it was designed to allow for extraction of scanned files. Now, even back 10 years ago, or even now, that optical character recognition that extracts data isn't 100%. It's always been about 80–85% accurate. So there's a whole process in TaxCycle, a whole process in DoxCycle to review any extracted data before you post it over to the tax return. And we'll go through that today. But I just wanted to give you a bit of context of where this sits in your workflow, because now that we have AFR, when I talk to tax preparers about how they're using DoxCycle, it's not as much to extract that slip data because they can go grab that from the CRA. But if you have a whole bunch of medical receipts or donation receipts or other source documents that you want to keep on file in case the CRA requests them, or you want to make sure your client has a copy of, because you may give them back to them and then who knows where it ends up. You can do that really easy and in a really organized way in DoxCycle. So we'll look at all that today. So what we'll look at is what is DoxCycle, kind of give you a tour of the start screen. We're going to tell you how to link it with TaxCycle and how to acquire documents, so scan and import. And then a little bit about how it automatically organizes documents and how you can help it along the way if it can't figure out what something is. We'll look briefly at posting data to TaxCycle and some of the review tools around that. And then we're going to show you how to print a whole TaxCycle tax return back into DoxCycle, so it is a full archive of the tax return and the DoxCycle files or the source documents. And finally, I want to show you what you can do when the CRA comes back to your client and says, I want a copy of all those medical receipts, which happened to me this year. So it definitely helps to have an organized PDF sometime in August when they ask for such things. All right, that's TaxCycle. But DoxCycle itself is a separate program. So everything DoxCycle will be green, everything TaxCycle is blue. That's one way to keep it straight in your mind. But the start screen in here should look familiar to you if you're a TaxCycle user. We have our different types of files that you can create in DoxCycle, so you can link them to T1, T2, T3, T4, and T5 files if you need to. And we have a similar kind of menu here that will show you the options for creating a new file from DoxCycle. There is also a sample file. If you have nothing in your recent file lists for DoxCycle, there's a sample file, can show you some of the things that you will see today if you want to use it. I'm going to create a file from scratch because DoxCycle is one of those things that the sample file is interesting, but really until you try it out, by importing some of your own source documents, it's harder to see how it all comes together. One thing I would suggest before you start using DoxCycle is that you go into the options and there's a lot of options that you can change to help with your workflow. Not quite as many as in TaxCycle. And we'll come back to a couple of them along the way. But one of the ones that I think is important when you get started is that you go take a look at your folders here. So this is a little bit more basic compared to what happens in TaxCycle, but you can set a different folder for each year of return in the same way. It doesn't have the variables that you'll see in TaxCycle's folders, but it is worth coming in here and making sure that you place this file in the folder that you want it to be in. I just want to make sure that you can come in here. So you can separate it out by years and modules and types of returns. And it's worth doing before you get started. You see I didn't finish doing mine here. The default is actually in my users folder. So I like to move that to my D drive here on my machine. But wherever it works for your office, to store these final source documents. All right. Now, of course, there's actually several different ways to create a DoxCycle file. You can start over here on DoxCycle's end of things. You can create a file from a T1 return if you have one that's open already. You can create it from importing a document, and you'll have to provide a little bit of information. You can create it straight from the scanning. It's a similar kind of thing. Or create a blank new file as well. Really, to create a file in DoxCycle, all you need to do is give at least one taxpayer to it and select the year, and enter a bit of their information, their first name and their last name. Now, my favorite way of doing this, though, is if you're already carrying forward a TaxCycle tax return. I like to do this from TaxCycle itself. You may have noticed the carry forward and link option on the TaxCycle start screen. And this is designed to carry forward your TaxCycle file and create the one for the next year. And at the same time, create a linked DoxCycle file so the two can work together. It's kind of the most efficient way to create both a TaxCycle and DoxCycle file at the same time. So we're going to do that. I will click carry forward and link. And I have hidden my DoxCycle files for this seminar in a slightly different place. And I'm going to grab my 2022 file here, and so we can get that carried forward in 2023. Just bearing in mind that the 2023 version of TaxCycle, that T1 that you're seeing here, of course, is just a preview version, but that doesn't matter for today. We should be all good to go using the preview version, just like you would. And you'll notice that this file has several different taxpayers in it. It's got a principal taxpayer, a spouse, and 2 full dependent returns. And then there's also a dependent worksheet as well. And we're going to play around a little bit with how this linking happens. If I go back over to DoxCycle, while it carried forward that TaxCycle return, it created this equivalent DoxCycle PDF. And in this DoxCycle PDF, it's created placeholders for documents related to each of the taxpayers. So this is the full tax returns. So dependent returns, not dependent worksheets if you're over in the TaxCycle world. So we've got Jason and Josie Sims over here, and we're going to get into filling in these little sections on here in a moment or two. The important thing on on both sides of things here is to take a moment to save your return, of course. Once you've created this link, you want to save this link, and you want to do that on both sides of things. So the first one I just saved was my TaxCycle file, and the other one was my DoxCycle file. You may have noticed there that my DoxCycle, as soon as I went to save my TaxCycle file, my DoxCycle file save also popped up, there is a little option in both programs that allows you to automatically save the TaxCycle file when you save a DoxCycle file, or vice versa. So if you take a look in, and of course I've trying to remind myself, it's on the sharing tab in DoxCycle. I have this option checked, and I'm not sure if it's checked by default, but it means if I click save in DoxCycle, it will save the TaxCycle file at the same time, which can be kind of handy, especially when you're dealing with linked files like this. But it's up to you. If you like to keep them separate, that's okay as well. I think there's an equivalent version of that on the TaxCycle side of things to force the save on the DoxCycle world. Now, by default, TaxCycle has added all these taxpayers to the DoxCycle file. And if I hit the Edit Taxpayer box at the top here, you can see I've got my first names, last names, and my social insurance numbers for all those taxpayers. One of the things that is really neat about DoxCycle is you can be flexible with this. You don't have to put all the taxpayers into the same DoxCycle file if you want. You can mix and match a little bit. And so what I mean by this is if, say, Thomas and Abigail are preparing their tax return and they want, all the source documents that came with theirs, but at the same time, you're going to prepare Jason's because he's in university and he needs, he has tuition credits to transfer. But Thomas and Abigail don't want to share that their final tax return in its entirety back with Jason. You can create a separate PDF file for Jason here. And the way that I go about this is I first create this this family file, because that's the one with the most people in it. And then what I can do is over here in TaxCycle, I can unlink one of the taxpayers. So for example, we talked about Jason. If I go to Jason, I've got this tax link button up here, and I can choose to unlink Jason from the DoxCycle file. And we'll come back in a minute and I will show you what happens here. On the DoxCycle side of things, I also want to take him out of that file just so I don't forget. And I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to hit my save, and then it should save in both places. So now on the DoxCycle side of things, I have a single family file for Thomas, Abigail, and Josie. And on TaxCycle, Jason is not linked to that file, and Jason is not linked to that file, but Thomas and Abigail are linked, as you can see here through the menu. Actually, this is a good point to show you something. When you link a DoxCycle file, you can actually find details of that link in TaxCycle under this link menu. If you haven't seen it before, under the track menu, there's a little link menu here. And this shows all the related returns. So the ones you've carried forward from. This is a pretty old client of mine. But it'll also show the linked document for DoxCycle PDF as well. So here in Thomas's situation, you can see that there's a linked DoxCycle file. But if I go back to Jason's, you can see that Jason has no links to display in there for DoxCycle, except for his returns. All right. Now, I still have a problem, right? I need that source document file for Jason that is separate from the family file. So this is the last step in the process. I'm going to go back up here to this tax link button again, and I have two choices. I can create a new DoxCycle file for Jason, or I can choose to add Jason back into that family file. Since I just removed him, I'm going to create a brand new DoxCycle file for Jason. And you can see it appeared in the link sidebar here. And if I go over here, I'm going to have Jason's, and I'm going to save it because I always save everything, Jason's placeholder PDF on the left side. So I have two DoxCycle files and one TaxCycle file, and they can link back and forth. So you can make these combinations so that you save the files, the source documents, how you would like. All right, so the next step in here, of course, is right now we've got this placeholder PDF. If I send this to my client, it's got no documents in it. If I put it in my filing system, I have nothing in it yet. We still aren't all the way there. But this is the primary thing you're going to be doing with DoxCycle, is acquiring those documents and getting them organized in here. So there's a few different ways to do this. I'm going to go back old school and imagine that you have a scanner sitting on your network or on your desk, and you're going to stack those items, that stack of documents, whether it's medical receipts or slips or whatever that your client gives you. You can stack them in the scanner, and then you can initiate that scanner from here. There is a scanning button here, and if you have multiple scanners on the network, you can choose them. I happen to have a multifunction brother scanner up in the other office here, so I could, in theory, stack them in there and run over here and initiate it. Now, there is another way to manage this. If you have a central scanning station, you can set that up in options as well. And that's on this monitor tab. You can actually monitor a folder somewhere, which is really handy. If you have a larger office and a central scanning station, someone walks over to the scanner, they save those files to whatever the place is on the network. And then in DoxCycle, you can get a preview and monitor them from here. So you would set that up here under the monitored folders options. And you can even choose what to do with those documents after they've been imported to DoxCycle or acquired. So I have, for example, a recent scans folder, and I can always move those to imported scans. So I'm not deleting the files, but I'm getting them out of my way, and you'll see why this might be important. Anything that you use in a monitored folder will appear over on the right in this unassigned documents panel. And what it's doing is basically looking in the monitored folder and saying, we got a few things to import. So, and then I can get a quick preview and choose whether to add them to the file. And when I add them to the file, I can actually choose what kind they are, or I can add multiple and just import them and let DoxCycle figure it out. So this is one way to bring files in if you're monitoring a folder. If you've got the scanner on your desk, or it's really easy to initiate a scan, you can also do a similar thing. You can just start the scanner by clicking the scan button. Or you can say, I am importing a bunch of multi-page statements. I want to be a little more specific so DoxCycle can manage this more quickly. So I'm going to put my multi-page into my document feeder, tell them that it is, well, current year tax return, or it was a tax return from last year, or a statement, or just some other double-sided document or single-sided multi-page document, things like that. So you have the ability to specify what you're importing ahead of time if you think that's going to help DoxCycle recognize what you have. Of course, I'm not going to run around and do scanning from here today, but the other way that clients send you things is via email and through documents that they might send in through tax folder. And it really is quite simple to add those documents to DoxCycle. If I can get where I'm going. It's as simple as picking them up and dragging them onto the window. So you see I've got receipts for Abigail and Thomas and different taxpayers, and all I have to do is just go like this and then let DoxCycle recognize the documents and organize them. And I think this is so much fun. That was pretty fast actually too. So you'll see on the left, we've gained a T4 here from Thomas. It knows that it's a T4 and it knows what the employer's name is. So DoxCycle's done a really quick job of recognizing many of these items. It's figured out that there's a donation receipt here, and even the amount of the receipt is extracted. It knows that Abigail has some medical expenses, for example. But it's also come up with a couple of things it doesn't know what to do with, and that's this orange bar. And this orange bar can appear if you import, drag and drop, or if you scan something. It basically says, I don't really know what this is. Can you help me organize it quickly? And this is where I would say that optical character recognition isn't perfect. And I like to remind people of this because it seems like, and I remember starting at DoxCycle all those years ago and going, this is great. You're going to scan this in and we're going to get the data and it's all going to be perfect and go straight to the tax return. And I had it explained to me several times about it's not perfect. So we have to go through, sometimes it'll get hung up and sometimes there will be things you need to add. And this isn't specific to DoxCycle. This is a technology problem that is important just to know when you're using DoxCycle. The good news is it doesn't take that long to fix and categorize the few that it might not figure out. So I can click this Fix Now button, and I get my preview if I want. And here I notice really quickly that these are all the same documents, so I can check them all off on the bottom left. And it's fairly certain it's a medical expense, so I can make sure that's the case. And if I want to really quickly put the issuer in, I can do that as well, and I can decide who they belong to. Now, I'm going to leave one unresolved because I do want to talk about that. If you've got a larger document and you want to combine all the files into a single document in DoxCycle, which would mean it would be nested, you can check this box here. And as soon as I do this, it will, if I want to do this, it will, and I click OK, it will throw those medical expenses nice here on the side under Thomas's section. Okay. Now, it can also happen that you may just have one expense or one receipt that you want to deal with, and you can just click on it as well. And all documents in DoxCycle have this green bar at the top of them, and that's called the Page Assistant. And the Page Assistant lets you change some of these properties about a particular document. So right now this is unclassified, but I could come in here and call it a medical expense. And that's, as soon as I do that, and because it had already decided to put it under Thomas, it moved that document up. So I can add more details from here if I would like as well. I don't necessarily have to use the unclassified document assistant. It just lets you do this for several documents at once if you need to. So you can move documents around. I can move this to Josie if it's her T2202. And I actually think it's meant to be Jason's, so we might want to put it in his file afterwards. So I can delete them as well if I want and choose to get it out of the file altogether. You can also organize items carefully by dragging them around. So if I want, for some reason, to have all the donation expenses under Abigail's, I can come here and drag them into Abigail's expenses and deductions if I would like. That should have worked. But what I got to do is hover a little bit on the heading and then find the one that it should be before I move it over. So that is a little bit of a trick. The drag and drop works really well, but it's not just a drop, it's kind of a hover. So let's pretend that this was something other than a donation. I can hover over the expenses and deductions, say it was a childcare expense, and that will give me these grayed out options of what it could be. And I can just drop it in as childcare if I want. I know it's not that, but just imagine if you needed to do that. So something to bear in mind is that if you're dragging and dropping, hovering over the heading or the main heading here is worth the time because it'll give you the items that you can select from and easily classify. I'm going to just make that a donation receipt again. Back we go. All right, you can also right-click in the sidebar and do several different options. One that is used quite a bit is to switch taxpayer and move a document to a different taxpayer if you need to as well. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about what you can do to help you with data entry and how you can post data to TaxCycle if you want to. And this was the exciting thing about DoxCycle before we had AFR, because we put a lot of work into having it recognize standard slips like the T4 slip. And it was able to figure out what the numbers were and what boxes they went to. And that was a huge time saver until AFR came around and made it was a little better than that. So because we didn't have to do so much verification. So DoxCycle still extracts some of the amounts off of slips. Again, you're going to need to verify and be sure. So in this case, it actually extracted the 80,000 that is in box 14. And you see this in these little yellow boxes at the side, but it doesn't realize that it's box 14. So if I'm going to post this data over, I'm going to have to do a review. This X, of course, means that it's missing its box number. Same thing for the income tax deducted. And as I go through, I can verify the amounts, and I want to check off each of these amounts if they match what I see on the slip that I imported or scanned. And obviously, when you scan something in, the quality of your scan is going to make a difference to figure out how much it's going to actually be able to extract. So I'm pretty happy with this extraction. And as soon as I check off each of those boxes and lines, I am given these options to post this data over to my T1 return if I want. If I carried forward a return and there's a slip in here, and we think that it's a match, you can see that Tom's Trucks is already over in my T1 file, so I could hit post. But I can also choose other T4 slips if I want and choose to replace to them if I want. And if I expand this, I can see what the data was on that slip. I'm sorry, the first one here, it says to post to a new slip called Tom's Trucks, because I didn't actually have one last year. Last year I had Oliver's Électricité, and for some reason I have two slips in there. I must have used them in a test file kind of differently. But I can get my preview. My point with this is I can get my preview over here if I decide I want to try and replace that data on those slips. And this is where it can be a bit of a review tool. So I'm going to post Tom's Trucks over. It marks it as purple, and that says it's posted. And I can always come back and repost if I want to correct it by dismissing this post. Now, over in TaxCycle here, it has automatically opened up that DoxCycle, that T4 slip. And you can see the italics on the T4 slip in the column here. We'll show you what has been imported from DoxCycle. And also, you can see that on the form tab, anything that isn't the last import, if it was from DoxCycle, will have a green background on the form icon, and it will have a big green D. Okay, so that's a slip. I do want to talk a little bit about what people are probably more excited about, which is, oh, what if I can get all my medical expenses in like this? And my answer to you on medical expenses is some things you could move over, but you're probably going to be doing a bit of data entry on the DoxCycle side in order to make that happen. So this is where it really depends on how you want your office to work. Say you've got someone in admin or a tech who brings in all the files for you and brings in all the source documents and puts them into a DoxCycle file. They may never necessarily do much in the TaxCycle file, but they could come in here potentially and organize the file and make sure that the amounts are extracted correctly, or so that they're ready for posting to TaxCycle if you want. It's really a question of what's the fastest thing for you to be able to do during tax season. So, you know, if I'm going to try and post over a medical expense, I need my amount, I need my patient, and if I want, I can have my description as well. And it will go to the medical expenses worksheet from here. So that's going to create a new link on the medical expenses worksheet, and I'm just going to open this up for you. And you can see each slip from DoxCycle will create a row on the medical expenses worksheet in TaxCycle. So that is one way to bring in this information. You may have other ways, right? Because TaxCycle allows Excel import and other things like that. You will notice in the sidebar here that any slips that have been imported have this kind of where the data's been imported, have this purple icon. And if they have data that's been extracted but hasn't been imported, they have the yellow icon. And if they're ready for import, because you've checked off the amount, like I'm just going to put this receipt number in here, and I'm ready to post, they will have a green icon in them. And why this is important is if this part of your workflow, you can actually filter this sidebar based on that status. So if I go to the filter tab, you see there's a posting section here. I can just reduce my list in the sidebar to those that I need to verify, and then, or those that are verified, or I can show just those that have been posted. So I can choose how I want to manage working through any source documents that I've brought in. Just remember, I can clear the filters over here. So this is an important concept depending on how you want to work in your office. And there are other filters on this tab, you know, as you get through here as well. Right, and that's where we should take a look a little bit at the review tools. So some firms decide that they're not going to bother posting data, but they're going to use DoxCycle as purely as a review tool. So what's useful about this is that it allows you to run, say, and if you're on a bigger screen than I am today, and I do this on purpose so that you can see more on your smaller screen if you have one, I can sit here and I can actually do data entry side by side as well. And you may find that this is just as quick as trying to review every single slip in DoxCycle. Again, you choose your process, right? So I can go through this, and when I have two linked files, you'll see that this little icon here, there's a T and a D and a purple link in the middle of it. You'll see it in a few places. You'll see it on the page assistant, and you'll see it in the sidebar here too. And what this allows you to do is quickly open the related form back over in TaxCycle. So this is a quick way to review data on either side. So if say you've got some data that you have questions about in DoxCycle, you can review it over here. And you have all those tools that you've had in the past. You can put a memo on here if you'd like. You can even create, you have these stamps or final sign-off you can use. It's kind of like, having a stamp in the office on your paper document as well. You can even create custom stamps if you would like them. So, let's see if we want a stamp that's called call client, right? And let's make it nice and bright. And there's some options about when you want to place it or how you want to do things. But I can go and I can get my call client stamp and put it on the screen if I'd like. So it's just like having an ability to add notes to source documents in the office without actually harming them at all or making it permanent at all. The next thing I think that's important, so let's just imagine I've gone all the way through and prepared the tax return now. I've kind of showed you some of the pieces that you can use to organize this document before preparing a tax return. Imagine that I'm all the way done and I've completed the return. And I want to finalize that document back. I want to send everything from TaxCycle back into DoxCycle so that I have a printed copy or a PDF copy of the tax return as filed. So let's just imagine this is filed. I know I haven't transmitted it yet, and I've still got work to do. What I like to do, and this depends on how you're going to, what you're going to give to the client and what you're going to give to just keep in your office. But say you're going to keep an office copy of all the source documents and the tax return. You can set up your print set to print to DoxCycle, and it will print directly back into the DoxCycle PDF for you. And you'll see it'll all be nicely organized. And so all I do, once I've got this set up in my Office copy, I can either click it here, of course, click the DoxCycle icon in the print set, or if I'm printing, my client copy to one place and my Office copy somewhere else, I can do my print selected, or I can do it over here on my print PDF family tab as well, right? I'm just going to make sure I don't send a bunch of stuff to DoxCycle, to tax folder at the same time. But I can print over my Office copy in one step, and you'll see it'll start coming in over here in DoxCycle in a couple of minutes. It's kind of, you can keep working. Like, that's actually a concept behind how things work in DoxCycle and TaxCycle is, you can start printing something, you can keep working. If you're over in DoxCycle and you're importing something, if it's got that green bar at the top, you can do more things, you can organize. So you don't have to stop and wait for everything to be done. What's neat about, what I really like about printing back into the DoxCycle file is that DoxCycle recognizes this as well. It puts it in a little folder called the current year tax return. It gives it all kinds of headings and things like that so that, you can find the page you need within the file as well. So that is super handy. We're just finishing up here. The last couple of documents being recognized. And I'm going to hit my save button. And then I do want to show you something. I'm actually going to close this file for a second. And I want to show you what it looks like if you've, I just want to show you that you can open up this file again if you need to in Acrobat. You can send it to your client. And this is what I think is really cool, is that when you get, DoxCycle creates a PDF file and a PDF standard file. So it's not fancy. You don't have to have special software to open it up. You can send it to your client and they have a full record of all their source documents and their finalized tax return that they can keep on file as well for themselves. And you could send it through tax folder if you'd like. That's another way of going about it, right? That's their final return. But it's all in here, all the same pages that are in your DoxCycle viewer. Around the office, we actually end up using DoxCycle to just scan anything in because we find that it's a really quick way to initiate a scan. I know Blair on our QA team does that a lot. Okay, so the one last thing I want to show you is what you can do if the CRA does come back and decide, you need to give me copies of all those medical expenses. And again, this depends on how you bill your clients and whether that's part of your engagement to charge them. Like, if that's going to happen, are you just going to pull that all together for them? Are you going to re-engage them in the summer? Either way, you need to find these documents and get them uploaded to the CRA through Represent a Client. The great thing is that that's pretty easy to do if you have an organized DoxCycle file. So I can come in here into this sidebar, and I'm just going to collapse a few things. And if I want to gather up all my medical expenses, I can easily hold down the Control key on my keyboard and select all of these. And then all I have to do is say, save as a separate PDF, and it will extract them out, and I can choose where to put it. And actually, that's what that second option is about. I can say save as a separate PDF to a CRA folder. And so some firms, we heard that some firms wanted to have a spot where they put these extracted documents. And you can default what this folder is in options as well. And if I do that, I can save it as a separate PDF. And you see it's really smart. It tells me that these are all the medical expenses that I have. And I can click save. And then really all I need to do is, I guess maybe I'm going to put a cover letter together, but all I really need to do is then take that document and upload it through Represent a Client. So it can be really quick. What could be a long process with a little bit of lead time for each client when you're preparing the return. If you get to August or the summer and the CRA wants you to give that data back, you hopefully are not adding to your workload at another time of the year. So I like to say that is a super handy part of using DoxCycle in your workflow, in your practice. And now we are almost done here today. I just wanted to make sure that I pointed out to you where you can find the DoxCycle help topics, because there are a lot of them and there's a lot to help you get going. So they're under the resources tab, and of course you can search for them. But if you go to the help topics area, and you got to scroll down a little bit because there is a whole section for the DoxCycle, how to use DoxCycle, all about scanning and importing documents, organizing documents, linking documents, extracting documents, all of that. There is a fair amount of information here if you get stuck as well. And I think we are done for the day. I wanted to thank you all for being here. And I hope that this gives you a little overview of DoxCycle and how you might use it to help your practice flow smoother in the coming tax season.